What happens when a steadfast father stands up to an unrelenting enemy right in the middle of a neighborhood that seems peaceful on the surface? On one fateful afternoon, the terrified screams of 8-year-old Amara pierce the air. She's attacked by none other than her next-door neighbor, Linda, the head of the homeowners association, armed with a can of pepper spray in her hand and burning hatred in her eyes. But what pushed everything to the brink? What dark secret hides behind that woman's fake smile? And how much will Amara's family have to sacrifice to protect the home they've just built? Drop a comment with the number 9 to let us know you're ready to dive into the next twist of this story. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss a single gripping detail. For years ago, when Amara was just 4 years old, she was playing in the park near our house with her friends. Her innocent laughter blended with the morning birdsong. Amara loved to run and jump, feeling the ground tremble beneath her tiny shoes, the simple joy of childhood igniting with every step. But then, in one cruel moment, everything fell apart. A drunk man, still clutching a beer bottle, barreled through the park in his car at a reckless speed, oblivious to the kids playing nearby. Amara didn't have a chance to run. The brutal impact sent her small body flying across the grass, her legs horribly injured. People around screamed and rushed to the scene, but it all felt like it was happening in slow motion, suffocating and unreal. I still remember collapsing beside her, seeing her lying there motionless, blood staining her clothes, her tiny hands cold in mine. The minutes waiting for the ambulance stretched on like a lifetime, the air thick with terror and helplessness. Amara was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, and the days that followed were an endless nightmare. She lay still in a hospital bed for months, enduring countless surgeries just to survive. The recovery was grueling beyond words. Painful therapy sessions where she'd bite her lip to keep from crying, the agony dragging on relentlessly. When the doctor told us Amara would never walk again, it felt like the world crashed down around us. We grieved for her, for the dreams that were now gone. But Amara didn't give up. Even at just 4 years old, she looked at me with those bright, fierce eyes and said, "I'm still me, Dad. So what if my legs don't work? I can still do lots of things." That's Amara, a resilient little girl with a steel will and a heart as big as the sky. She learned to maneuver a wheelchair with incredible skill, turning her limits into strength. Amara didn't just survive. She's a true fighter. That unbreakable spirit touched everyone who's ever met her. We poured our hearts into creating a place where Amara could grow, where she could rise above the obstacles life had thrown at her. Leaving our old home wasn't easy. It meant tearing ourselves away from deep roots and stepping into an uncertain future, but it was necessary. The old house had become an invisible prison for Amara, with narrow pathways and towering stairs that turned every little task into a tearful struggle. Watching her fall flat on the floor just to grab a glass of water ripped my heart apart, a wake-up call that she deserved better. The new house, though far from perfect, was the first glimmer of hope we saw. It promised the changes she needed. A wide entrance so she could will herself in, a sturdy ramp instead of stairs, and small adjustments so she wouldn't feel trapped anymore. This wasn't just about comfort. It was about giving Amara back the freedom she'd lost. For us, this move opened a new door, a fresh start brimming with possibility. We longed to turn this place into a real home, where Amara's laughter could ring out freely and her resilience could thrive. Every packed box, every finished blueprint, fueled my unshakable belief. The challenges ahead felt small when I pictured the day Amara could live without being held back by senseless barriers. That's the dream we're determined to make real, and we're holding tight to that hope, step by step. Amara stayed with her grandparents while we moved out of the old place and started fixing up the new house. The renovations had begun. Dust swirled everywhere, and the constant hum of drills filled the air. Being away from her wasn't what any of us wanted, but we didn't have a choice. Amara's safety always came first. We couldn't let her breathe in the brick dust-filled air or endure the ear-splitting noise of the machinery. A peaceful, clean space was best for her, while we poured everything into getting the house ready to bring her home. Still, without Amara there, it all felt so empty as we packed up old memories and looked toward a new beginning. Moving day arrived in a whirlwind of chaos. As I boxed up the old house, I felt a mix of sadness and relief wash over me with every touch. We'd once loved that place for the years we'd lived there, but it had also trapped our family in some of our darkest days. It was time to let go. Yet, when I locked the door for the last time, it felt like I was cutting away a piece of my soul. Across the street, Linda, the homeowners association president, stood waiting with her cold eyes and fake smile. In her hands was a bucket of bleach, ready to hurl at Amara when she returned. All because she couldn't stomach a disabled black girl daring to exist in her so-called sacred neighborhood. The new house opened up a world of possibilities. As the moving truck rolled in, I stood quietly on the doorstep, breathing in air heavy with both the weight of the past and hope for the future. The movers worked fast, piling our belongings into the entryway in an organized mess. My wife and I split up tasks, keeping an eye on every box, our minds racing with thoughts of the day everything would fall into place. The noise of traffic and footsteps couldn't drown out the quiet joy simmering inside me. This was our chance to start over. A place where Amara could finally live the life she deserved, free to enjoy it. I was standing in the front yard, watching my wife double-check her list, when a sharp voice sliced through the air. "You the new folks?" It rang out, snapping us out of our thoughts. I turned and saw a woman at the corner of the street, holding a bucket that reeked of foul water. She flashed an awkward smile, her lips tight with tension. Her stiff posture screamed control, like she wanted the whole world to notice her presence. An uneasy feeling crept up inside me, impossible to shake. My wife and I paused, stepping closer, trying to respond to what seemed like a friendly gesture. She introduced herself, but I won't use her real name here. I'll call her Linda, not the name she gave, but the one that fits because of what she'd do later. At first, she acted nice, asking where we were from, why we picked this area. The questions sounded harmless, but her eyes scanned every inch of the house, darting over the movers with blatant suspicion that made me feel like we were being sized up. She lifted the bucket, calling it a welcome gift to clean the area, but I couldn't shake the growing unease. My wife nodded politely, thanking her, while I fought the urge to call out whatever twisted thing I sensed lurking beneath her show. I'd soon learn this wasn't just a neighborly hello. It was the start of the trouble Linda would bring, far beyond anything we could have imagined. Linda kept up her cheerful front, chatting with the over-the-top enthusiasm you'd expect from someone you just met. Her voice was soft, but her eyes swept over us with obvious caution, like she was hunting for something to criticize. After a few casual questions, she suddenly added, "I live right across the street. As the homeowners association president here, I make sure everything in this neighborhood stays up to standard." She smirked, but it sounded more like a power play than a welcome. I gave a vague nod, unsure how to react. We shared a bit about the house, our excitement about moving in, and our plans ahead. When I accidentally mentioned tearing out the front steps to build a ramp for Amara and hiring workers this week, Linda's face shifted. Her smile froze, and a flicker of irritation flashed in her eyes. "Don't let that black girl in the wheelchair ruin this neighborhood," she blurted out, her voice low but dripping with venom, instantly turning the air between us heavy and tense. Linda stood there for a moment, her eyes narrowing like she was swallowing every word I'd just said. "Humph." She let out a scoff, that fake sweetness in her voice turning into a sharp, unmistakable jab. "You think that ramp's gonna get approved just like that?" She leaned forward, her grip tightening on the bucket of filthy water, her gaze locked on our yard as if she could erase our plans right then and there. "This neighborhood isn't the place for that kind of mess." I took a deep breath, steadying my voice against the anger rising inside me. "Amara needs it," I said, each word deliberate. "She's in a wheelchair, and we'll do whatever it takes to make her comfortable." Linda smirked, her head tilting slightly, but her eyes sparked with contempt. "I don't care," she snapped, her tone dropping into a menacing growl. "A disabled black girl isn't worth ruining this place. Don't think for a second I'll let this slide." Her words stabbed the air like a knife, dripping with raw disdain. That last sentence rang out cold and clear, a declaration of war from her throne as HOA president, aimed straight at us, the outsiders daring to defy her. As Linda turned and stormed off, her footsteps thudding against the sidewalk, a chill shot down my spine. That initial welcome had morphed into the opening shot of an unrelenting battle. In the days that followed, Linda was everywhere. The crew had barely unloaded their tools to start breaking down the steps when she planted herself across the street, arms crossed tight, her stare sharp as a blade. I tried to chalk it up to curiosity, but the way she watched every swing of the hammer, every bag of cement, made the air feel suffocating. One morning, as I stepped out to check on things, Linda's voice sliced through from behind me. "Got permits for this mess?" she barked, pointing at the pile of materials, stepping so close the workers backed off, one gripping his hammer with shaky hands, looking to me for how to handle the tension exploding around us. I jumped in before the worker could speak. "Yes," I growled, stepping right up to Linda. "Every permit's approved, all legit." She spun to face me, her lips curling into a forced smile, eyes narrowing with doubt. "Oh, I'm sure," she replied, her voice smooth but oozing icy fakery. "Just making sure, because this neighborhood can't have sloppy nonsense dragging down its value." Her words hung there, her intent crystal clear. She hated what we were doing, and she wanted me to feel the weight of it. That making sure she talked about quickly turned into outright sabotage. One afternoon, she parked her car smack across our driveway, tires crushing the bricks we just unloaded, forcing the crew to stop. I ran out as she strolled from the car, jingling her keys, feigning surprise. "Oh my, I didn't see that stuff," she chirped, her tone light but her eyes gleaming with triumph. The next day, her car was back in the same spot, tires sunk deep into the dirt, and I knew this wasn't a game anymore. Another time, I caught Linda standing in our yard, phone raised high, filming the construction with a fierce glare. I marched over, anger blazing in my chest. "Linda, what are you doing with that?" I shouted, my voice trembling from holding it together. She lowered her hand, her lips twisting into a smug grin. "Collecting evidence," she said, her calm tone chilling. "I need to report this chaos to the board, see if it's even allowed. Don't take it personal." My jaw clenched, but I forced my voice to stay steady. "I've told you it's all legal. Stay out of our business." Linda shrugged, slipping the phone into her pocket, but before walking off, she tossed back, "We'll see. I don't let things slip through my fingers." Her words cut like a blade through the air, leaving me standing there, blood boiling. This wasn't neighborly concern. Linda was out to crush us, step by step, with a resolve that made my skin crawl. Her antics didn't stop at petty disruptions. She started targeting the crew directly, turning her presence into a daily nightmare. She'd barge into the work zone like she owned it, bucket of dirty water in hand, her icy voice slicing through the hum of machinery. "How far you gotten?" she snapped, her eyes raking over the tools with disgust. "Who says that ramp for that black girl meets code? This is a residential area, not a charity dump." The crew tried to stay cool, giving short answers, but the sweat rolling down their foreheads betrayed how tense they were. Linda didn't budge. She stood there, scrutinizing every hammer swing, every sack of sand, like a hunter stalking prey. Sometimes she'd pace along the curb, phone in hand, filming while muttering threats about dealing with this mess. The air grew so thick with pressure that one worker shot me a desperate glance, silently begging for rescue from the storm Linda had whipped up. The showdown erupted when one of the lead workers, a tough guy with decades of experience handling all kinds of trouble, pulled me aside during a lunch break. His face was etched with frustration, his hand gripping his hard hat tight, his eyes flickering like he was holding back a plea for help. "Listen," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to check if Linda was lurking nearby. "We want to get this done, but that woman across the street's making everything a mess. She shows up every day, grilling us, stalking us, even threatening to call the authorities. You've got to do something. We can't take it anymore." My gut twisted with shame and rage. These were skilled workers, sweating to build a future for Amara, and here they were, treated like vandals. Linda's actions weren't just harassment. They were a blatant insult, stomping all over our efforts. The thought that she dared turn their hard work into a joke made me want to scream. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice low but sharp. "I'll put an end to this. You shouldn't have to deal with it." As he headed back to the crew, my eyes darted across the street. There was Linda, standing on her porch, bucket of dirty water in hand, her gaze piercing the worksite like a poisoned arrow. This wasn't curiosity or concern, it was a fight for control. She'd declared my family her enemy, and she was dead set on choking us out. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the leaves, and the crew was pouring the final layer of cement for the ramp, Linda struck. She charged across the street, her steps pounding like she was launching an attack, swinging the bucket of filthy water high. Without a second's hesitation, she planted herself in the middle of the site, bleach splashing across the ground just steps from the workers. "This is an upscale neighborhood," she roared, her voice hissing through clenched teeth, drowning out the mixer's hum. "Not a place for that black girl's ramp." I was in the kitchen, holding a glass of water, going over bills, when Linda's shout cut through the window, making my hand shake and water spill across the table. My stomach knotted like it was being squeezed. She'd been stirring chaos for weeks, but this was a dangerous turn. I bolted outside, heart pounding, determined to shut down this madness. By the time I hit the yard, one of the workers was already facing her. He stood tall, shovel gripped tight, eyes blazing with fury. "Shut your mouth," he growled, his patience gone. "We've got permits, we're legal. You want to fight? Take it to court." Linda's face flushed purple, her lips trembling, her eyes sparking like she'd burn him alive. She froze, bucket poised like she might hurl it at him. When he didn't back down, she spat out a few lines about a clean neighborhood, then spun around, bleach sloshing across the pavement, leaving a sharp, stinging stench in the air. I flung my glass to the floor and charged into the yard, chest heaving with anger and resolve. "If you've got a problem with my family, say it to my face," I yelled, my voice booming across the emptiness, overpowering the breeze. The world went still like the whole neighborhood held its breath. Linda stopped dead, turning to stare at me, her eyes wide with a flicker of shock. Then she smirked, a cold, lifeless grin. "I'm not targeting you," she said, her tone light but cutting like a blade, her hand squeezing the bucket so hard that water dripped to the ground. But the way she leaned in, her eyes darting, showed she was trembling. Not from fear, but from rage ready to erupt. "Fine," I shot back, my voice low and icy, stepping right to the edge of the yard, locking eyes with her without blinking. "But hear this loud and clear. My family belongs here as much as anyone, and if you can't handle that, Linda, deal with it yourself." Her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes flashing with wild fury. I braced for one of her usual jabs, but instead, she whipped around, stomping back to her house, swinging the bucket so hard that water splashed across the grass. Her door slammed shut with a bang that shook the street, like a gunshot signaling war. I let out a heavy breath, shoulders sagging, and turned back to the porch. My wife stood there, eyes wide with shock, a faint, forced smile tugging at her lips. "Well," she said, her voice tinged with sarcasm, "that's one heck of a way to meet the neighbors." I managed a weak laugh, but my chest still burned from the clash. This wasn't a win. It felt more like the opening shot of a fiercer fight, a threat looming on the horizon. Still, I'd drawn a line, and Linda needed to know we wouldn't break. Not today, not ever. As I sank into a chair, my wife rested her hand on mine, her warmth seeping through, but her eyes were clouded with exhaustion. "Funny," she muttered, her voice dry. "Making such a great friend already." I tried to laugh, but it caught in my throat. There was no joy in this moment, just a heavy tiredness settling in, like every ounce of strength I'd poured into today had been drained by the nightmare named Linda. I stared out at the street as it darkened, the streetlights casting eerie shadows through the trees, my breathing slowing but heavy. We came here for peace. A place to rebuild our lives, to give Amara the home she deserves. But now, it feels like a battlefield, where we're fighting to hold on to every scrap of ground. This house was supposed to be a sanctuary, but with Linda lurking like a ghost, it's become a fortress under siege, the air thick with hostility. I glanced at my wife, her head bowed, staring at the floor, her hands trembling. A silent question hung between us. Did we pick the wrong place? We traded everything, ripped up our past, poured our strength into this dream, only to end up on the defensive, with Linda threatening us every moment, determined to drive us out. A cold shiver crawled up from my stomach, spreading through me, making me shudder. I wanted to believe Linda's aggression would fade, that she'd get bored and give up, but deep down, I knew that was a fantasy. Every step she took, every move she made, ratcheted the tension higher, like a rope about to snap. If I'd read her right, she'd never let go. I leaned back in my chair, eyes fixed on the horizon where darkness swallowed the last scraps of daylight. Peace was just a fragile shell now, ready to shatter any second. I gripped my wife's hand, our fingers lacing together, hoping that small connection could keep us steady against the storm barreling toward us, fierce and unavoidable. The renovations were finally done, and for the first time since we got here, the house truly felt like a home. After long days of sweat, wrestling with dust and Linda's relentless disruptions, we turned our dream into reality. A place for Amara. The wide entryway glowed in the morning sun, the ramp standing solid as a symbol of resilience, every detail sparking hope for a fresh start. Today was the day Amara would see it all. Her grandparents arrived early, their old car pulling up to the curb, and I saw Amara press her face to the window, her eyes shining with curiosity, her lips moving as she asked her grandma something. She was eager to explore the home we'd built with everything we had, a place where she could grow without being held back. For us, this was a precious moment, a milestone marking our survival through those dark months, and we'd poured our hearts into this day. I stepped into the yard, my chest swelling with pride mixed with nerves, ready to welcome Amara. But then Linda appeared, like a dark omen. She charged across the street, her steps pounding, the bucket of dirty water swinging dangerously in her hand, her face locked in contempt. She'd clearly been waiting, poised to ruin this big day. My wife rushed out behind me, our eyes meeting in that familiar flash of fear. A silent question. What's she going to do this time? The car door opened, and Amara rolled herself up the ramp, her small hands turning the wheels, her eyes wide with wonder at the house. But Linda cut through the joy, her figure closing in, her shoes hitting the ground like a drumbeat of conflict. When she stopped at the edge of the ramp, her lips twisting into a sinister snarl, the air thickened with tension. We braced ourselves, ready for whatever sabotage she'd unleash, though none of us could guess how far her madness would go today. This was Amara's day, but Linda was dead set on making it her stage. As Amara rolled closer to me, the wheels humming smoothly on the new ramp, Linda loomed just a few steps away, her warped smile flaring across a face flushed red with rage. "So this is the kid," she growled, her eyes glaring down at Amara's wheelchair, her voice dripping with undisguised disgust. Amara, still full of innocence and courage, looked up and stretched out her hand toward her. "Hi, ma'am," she said, her clear voice ringing through the heavy air, warming my heart with pride. No matter how she's treated, Amara always chooses kindness, even for those who don't deserve it. But Linda's response was vile. She jerked back, her hand clamping the bucket so tight the water sloshed, her eyes flashing with malice. "Don't touch me," she hissed, her voice shrill with panic. "I don't want filth from that wheelchair anywhere near me." Her words stabbed the air like a knife, and every muscle in my body tensed, ready to lunge at the threat dangling from her hand. Linda's words hit like a slashing blow. Amara froze, her small hand hovering in the air, that radiant smile vanishing, replaced by wide, stunned eyes. Slowly, she pulled her hand back, resting it on her wheelchair, the light in her gaze dimming, revealing a hurt she couldn't hide fast enough. My wife, standing beside me, her face flushed red, her hands clenched so tight her nails dug into her skin. I lunged forward, fury blazing in my chest, but I kept my voice icy and controlled. "Linda," I growled, each word sharp as a blade, "you just crossed the line." Her twisted smirk faltered. Then she swung her arm, the bucket of dirty water sloshing, her tone smooth but laced with mockery. "Oh, come on, don't blow it out of proportion," she shot back, her eyes glinting with smugness. "I'm just keeping things clean. Who knows what's on that wheelchair?" Her words dripped like poison, arrogant and fake. I gritted my teeth, holding back for Amara's sake, but inside, my blood boiled. Linda's contempt wasn't just talk. It was a punch straight to my daughter's dignity, to everything we'd fought to protect. Amara sat still, her tiny fingers gripping the wheels, clinging to some shred of strength against Linda's cruelty. My wife stepped forward, her hand on Amara's shoulder, her eyes blazing as she stared down our enemy. I wanted to roar, to unleash all my rage, but this wasn't the time to lose it. Linda had drawn a line, and I swore to myself she'd never cross it again. Before I could say more, she tilted her head, that smile twisting into a venomous sneer, her polite mask shattered. "You know what?" she snapped, her voice cutting like a knife. "I've had enough of this mess. The ramp, the big entrance. It's ruining the neighborhood. People come here for perfection, not to see that thing." She jabbed her hand toward the house, the bucket tilting, water splashing to the ground in a threatening smear. My wife surged forward, unable to hold back anymore. Her voice shook with fury, each word firing like a bullet. "Everything we've done is for Amara," she shouted, her hand tight on Amara's shoulder. "She needs this to live like any other kid. If you can't handle it, Linda, deal with it yourself." Linda's eyes darkened, her mouth dropping open in shock at the defiance. But then she roared back, her voice piercing the street. "Deal with it?" she screamed, swinging the bucket hard, water splashing near Amara's feet. "The whole neighborhood suffers because of that disabled black thing. Property values will tank because of that wheelchair." She thrust her finger inches from Amara's face, her breathing ragged, her face purple with rage. I stood frozen, my mind reeling at Linda's shamelessness. Amara sat motionless in her chair, her hands gripping the wheels so hard they turned white, her eyes shimmering with tears. My wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, tears brimming. That was the breaking point. "Shut up," I bellowed, charging toward Linda, my voice thundering over the wind. "Amara has every right to be here just like anyone. We're legal, we've got permits, and we're not scared of your sick prejudice. Get out now, or I'll make you regret it." Linda's face flushed purple, her lips trembling, her eyes sparking with wild fury. For a split second, I thought she'd back off, but she leaned closer, the bucket inches from my face, her voice hissing through clenched teeth. "Try me," she whispered, venomous as a snake. "People like you will be gone from here soon enough." Her words slammed into my chest, stealing my breath for a moment. My wife, sensing the storm raging inside me, grabbed my arm, pulling me back. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking, tears streaming down her pale face. I looked at her, saw those red-rimmed eyes fighting to hold back the pain. Linda didn't wait for a reply. She spun around, her boots stomping as she muttered curses under her breath, storming back across the street. Her door slammed shut, the sound rattling the air, leaving behind a stifling silence. I stood there, fists clenched until they ached, breathing hard, trying to smother the fire burning inside. My wife knelt to hug Amara, who bowed her head, eyes locked on the ground, shoulders trembling. Even after I'd yelled in Linda's face, the hurt she'd left behind cut deep, piercing every fiber of us. We thought that morning was the end, that Linda would pause her rampage, give us one day of peace. A deadly mistake. That afternoon, as Amara rolled around the yard, her small hands spinning the wheels to explore the flowers we'd planted, Linda struck again. No more sneaking or standing back. She charged straight onto the ramp, her face red with anger, her steps heavy like she'd crush everything in her path. Amara stopped short, her hands clamping the wheels, her eyes wide with panic. I bolted from the house just in time to see Linda block her way, her voice roaring like a wild animal. "I've got every right to stop this destruction," she bellowed, her eyes blazing at me, as if I were her sworn enemy. "Linda, get out of here," I growled, stepping right up to face her, each word hard and unrelenting. "You're threatening my family, and I won't allow it." But Linda didn't stop. She turned to Amara, her eyes narrowing, that venomous glare locking onto my little girl like a target. "You're useless," she hissed, her voice slicing like a knife. "Your parents are ruining this whole neighborhood just for that wheelchair." Amara flinched, her hands dropping from the wheels, her shoulders hunching as if she could hide from those vicious words. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. My heart twisted, rage exploding inside me as I surged forward. Before I could act, Linda leaned in close, her face just centimeters from Amara's, her hot breath searing. "You don't deserve to live here," she spat, each word low and dripping with poison, like a snake poised to strike. "Get away from her," I roared, my voice booming across the yard as I threw myself between Amara and Linda. She didn't back off. Her hand plunged into her pocket, pulling out a small black canister, her finger already on the nozzle. Time seemed to freeze. My eyes locked on it, my heart pounding as I realized the danger. "Don't," I shouted, lunging at her, but Linda was faster. With a cold flick, she sprayed a stream of pepper spray straight into Amara's face. Her scream tore through the air, a piercing, terrified sound of pain that echoed across the neighborhood. Amara clutched her face, her hands flailing in the air, her breaths ragged and choked with burning agony, while Linda stood there, a twisted smile curling across her crazed face. I rushed to Amara's side, my heart hammering like it might burst. My wife bolted from the door, her face pale with horror as Amara's cries filled the yard. "Are you insane?" I bellowed, spinning back to Linda, who stood gripping the canister, her expression icy and defiant. Not a shred of regret. She just smirked, like what she'd done was perfectly normal. Linda stepped back, raising the spray, her voice stiff. "I was protecting myself," she declared, her eyes flashing with triumph. "You'll pay for this," I yelled, my voice cracking with fury and fear. I turned to Amara. She was sobbing, clutching her face, my wife kneeling beside her, hands trembling as she tried to wipe away the burning spray. Amara's screams shredded the air, sharp, agonizing, each sound stabbing into my heart like a blade. I dropped to my knees, wrapping Amara's trembling little body in my arms, holding her so tight I could feel every broken breath she took. Her tears soaked my shirt, her screams fading into choked sobs, and I felt helpless, drowning in despair. Seeing her writhing, hands clutching her eyes, gasping through the pain, tore me apart inside. Everything blurred, only Amara's cries echoed in my head. From a distance, a figure raced toward us. A neighbor, his face drained of color, clutching a big jug of milk, stumbling in panic. "Use this," he shouted, his voice hoarse, unscrewing the cap and pouring it over Amara's flushed face, the white liquid streaming down onto the grass. This story doesn't end here. There's more heart-stopping drama waiting in part 2. Part 1 of Amara's family's journey shines a stark light on issues still plaguing life today. The refusal to accept those who are different, especially people with disabilities and minorities. Linda's actions, from her insults to spraying Amara with pepper spray, aren't just personal hatred. They're a symptom of a selfish, discriminatory mindset too common in tight-knit communities. Yet, through Amara's resilience and her family's tireless fight, we see a powerful lesson. Courage and love can be the strongest weapons against adversity. Instead of lashing out with violence or giving up in despair, Amara's family chose to stand up for their right to live, to exist. A profound message of unity and endurance. But how will this showdown end? What secrets will unravel in the chapters ahead? And what challenges will Amara's family face to hold onto their home? What do you think about today's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments below this video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to join us for the next thrilling installment. Thanks for watching all the way through today. Wishing you a peaceful day, and see you in the next video.